Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to this week's episode of the Last Round Boxing Podcast. Thank you again for joining us. No Mike this week, but I do have a special guest who's filling in for Mike's weekly spot. He's been on the podcast before. It's been a little bit since he's returned here to the last round, but he's a sports and entertainment attorney, and you might have also seen some of his work when he was with Ring City USA, which was on NBC Sports and other NBC platforms in the years past. Kurt Emhoff returns to the last round. Thank you for returning, Kurt.
Hey, I'm glad to be back, man. I always have a good time when I'm on here, so I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. We appreciate it, and I'm sure Mike appreciates you subbing in for him. So as long as you don't do a better job than him, you don't have to take his spot. But you might. His bar's pretty low, so we'll see. We will see.
Mike's awesome, so I don't think I can take his place, but I'll do my best to sub in.
Oh, he's gonna love that you said that. I'm sure you'll get a message tomorrow or later this week about that message. So congratulations to Mike. Well, I'll see him soon. Jumping straight back into it, fight reviews this past Saturday, the 31st of August, from Carson, California, in the Los Angeles County area here in Southern California, from the Dignity Health Sports Park, a Matchroom Boxing USA card on DAZN. 168-pound super middleweight Diego Pacheco improves to 22-0 with 18 KOs, with a 6-round KO over Suleki, who takes the third loss of his career. Pacheco landed a left hook in the sixth that stopped Suleki, and it was the first time, I believe, that Suleki has been stopped in his career. Kurt, so Pacheco's obviously still building his brand, building himself up, especially at 168 pounds, which obviously we know who the big dog is in and around that weight class. Matchroom is putting a lot of stock into this kid. He's a young guy. He's been fighting a lot in the LA area, which I understand in terms of the market. But what's your take on somebody like Pacheco, and obviously the recent win he just got this past weekend?
Yeah, it's always interesting when you see these prospects. You really don't know how good they are until they step up, right? Like, I mean, they can look like $1 million against the journeyman guys, but then when they start to take on the elite competitions, when you see how really good they are, I mean. Certainly, Suleki or Suleki, however you pronounce it, I definitely wouldn't call him elite. He's a guy who kind of made his name at middleweight. I mean, back in the day, when he fought Danny Jacobs, I thought he gave Jacobs all he could handle. I mean, I actually had him winning it like the halfway point in that fight because he was outworking Danny. But, Demetrius Andrade handled him pretty easily, and he really hasn't won any big step-up fights recently. So this was, Pacheco was a heavy favorite going in, and he lived up to it. He fought up to that. He dominated the fight. Suleki had a few moments, but he never really seemed to bother Pacheco, and you could see Pacheco was just kind of setting up big shots, and once he let him go, especially that one to the body, which he said he didn't even get all of them with it. He said it wasn't even that hard of a shot. It was just very well placed. So he took care of business. He did what he was supposed to do. He's young and up and coming, and took on a veteran guy, a smaller guy. So those are the type of guys you need to get out, and that's what he did. I like him. I kind of lump him in, with all these other kind of undefeated guys at 68, or now Munguia is not undefeated anymore, but like, Mbili and Berlanga and Munguia, they're all kind of at the same level. They haven't beaten really anybody elite, but, they're talented guys, but, I don't think any of them will really at this point in time bother Canelo. So, I think with Pacheco, I mean, he's one of these guys, like Eddie signed a bunch of U.S. guys. Pacheco is, I mean, he's one of the better prospects that Eddie signed. They brought him along really nicely. I know he's the mandatory in the BO, but I don't think he's ready for Canelo. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing him continuing his progression up the ladder, nice and slow and steady. Definitely wouldn't mind seeing him in, I mean, if they really want to step him up, like a fight with Mbili or a fight with the winner of Munguia and Bazinian, or even the winner of the Skull and Shishkin fight. I think those are wiser choices than Canelo, but you probably get paid more to fight Canelo. So I doubt if Canelo was willing that Eddie would turn it down. So. But yeah, listen, he's solid prospect, took care of business. That's all you can ask. And, now he's the mandatory. So he's got some leverage.
Let me ask you this. You called him a prospect. Is Berlanga, who obviously got the Canelo fight, who gets that fight in a couple weeks' time from today, about 2 weeks or so, who's at a higher level between those two?
That's a tough one. That's really a tough one. Listen, with Berlanga, full disclosure, I've done a little legal work for Berlanga and his trainers, the Ferrate brothers, Mark and Ray, are near and dear to my heart because their father used to train my guy Giovanni Lorenzo, so I know them very well. Their father, Pastor Ralph, may he rest in peace.
We appreciate the transparency, by the way. So not a lot of people would say that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Edgar, Edgar's a really strong kid, but yeah, I mean, he hasn't really, he hasn't taken on, like the real elite of the division either. I would say he and Pacheco are probably at about the same level. I mean, Munguia fought Derevianchenko, who was, a little younger and less beat up than the one who took on Mbili. I'd put Munguia probably like a half step ahead of those guys. And, Munguia's also fought, Munguia's been a world champion and fought some world-class fighters. So I put Munguia like above those guys. Bazinian's probably at about the same level, although I don't know that talent-wise he's at the same level. I mean, if I had to rate them, I'd probably put Pacheco a little bit ahead of Edgar. And Edgar and Bazinian, I think, is about even, but all of those would be really interesting fights. I think that, those guys, if Canelo decides to retire or move up or eventually vacate 68, I think, putting any of those guys in there in fights, it's going to be entertaining. They're all around the same level. Should be good fights.
With Berlanga getting that fight, the Canelo sweepstakes, as people like to call it, and Diego Pacheco obviously being in the same weight class, 168, and also signed to Eddie Hearn, just like Berlanga is now. And Canelo and Eddie Hearn have been very, very vocal about their friendship. They like each other. Canelo has always said, I believe he said in San Diego out here in Southern California a couple years back, he was like, oh, yeah, I like this guy. This is why, I like it. And Eddie Hearn was in the ring. They had a moment of friendship there, so they're obviously friends. Would you say by this time next year, Canelo fights May, September, he's been doing that for years. By this time next year, would Pacheco be one of the opponents for Canelo? Assuming Canelo gets by Berlanga and all that, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's, there's not, with Benavidez out of the division and Morrell out of the division,
right?
What do you have left? I mean, honestly, people are bitching about the Canelo Berlanga fight, but Berlanga's legit top 10 at this point. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it, and Edgar's obviously very marketable. I mean, Top Rank really did a good job of showcasing him and getting his name out there, and he draws very well in New York. So, I don't have a problem with the fight. I mean, just looking at what's out there. But yeah, I think Pacheco, I mean, he's just he's young. He's not like super, super young, but he's still young. I think another year is perfect. Like, by next September, maybe 2 or 3 more fights. Yeah, I could see him, potentially challenging Canelo. But I mean, you got to make Canelo at this point, unless he's falling off. You got to make him a heavy favorite against any of these guys. I mean, especially the way, if I've got Munguia a half step ahead of these guys, and he handled Munguia pretty easily. It's hard to say that Mbili or Pacheco or Berlanga are really going to give him a fight. But then again, hey, Canelo's in his mid-30s, and that's why they fight the fights. You never know, but it's hard to see any of those guys beating Canelo at this point.
Now, obviously there's always going to be criticism, like you mentioned right now. There's a sector of fans out there, just like any sport, that are going to dislike and voice their criticism against certain matchups. For example, Berlanga getting that fight. But like you mentioned, Canelo at this point in his career has very, very limited options in this division, and it doesn't seem like he wants to go back to 175, especially after the Bivol fight. And he's said that 168 is that's his sweet spot. He likes that division. So, how long, if you just had to speculate, I mean, how much longer could Canelo go before he just has to start recycling these opponents?
Well, I mean, listen, you've still got a little, you got this crop of undefeated guys like Mbili, like he could fight Mbili in May and Pacheco in September, and there's another year gone by. Obviously, fight fans are more, the elephant in the room is David Benavidez, right? Like that's the fight everyone wants to see. Canelo has been pretty adamant that he just, he doesn't really want the fight. He thinks Benavidez is a weight bully. And Benavidez is not waiting around. He moved up to 75. But it's one of those things. I mean, Canelo delayed the Triple G fight, and people were getting really pissed, and then eventually it got made. So, do I think, Canelo Benavidez never happens? I would never say never. May would be a nice time for it, but it's up to Canelo. He's the guy calling the shots. Obviously Crawford wants his shot at Canelo as well. That's another fight that fight fans wouldn't mind seeing. And Crawford desperately wants it. And we'll see. Canelo doesn't seem particularly jazzed about it. He just thinks he'd get no credit if he beats him. But we'll see. I mean, those are options for next May for Canelo. But should he, as it stands now, he doesn't want to fight either guy. So yeah, you've got Pacheco, you've got Mbili, maybe the winner of Shishkin and Skull, though I highly doubt that. I mean, to my mind, that's a perfect fight for Pacheco. Like if you really want to step him up, because Shishkin and Skull are around his level. Neither of them have really had a lot of, upper level fights. They haven't fought anybody who's elite. So it would make sense if, the winner of that fight against Pacheco, that's a great test, and it's for a title, and it gives you a little more leverage and a little more credibility to fight Canelo. So that's another option. But Canelo, it's disappointing, right? I mean, the fight we want is Benavidez. And if he's not going to give us that, then maybe, some people want Crawford. Some are like, it's a waste of time. Crawford's too small. But probably the second biggest fight that the fans want to see Canelo fight, and he has no interest in that either. So, yeah, it's a bit of a letdown.
And, just playing the fan in you, Kurt, and let's just say in 5 to 6 years, let's just say Canelo is retired or something. I don't want to say who takes the mantle of Canelo, because that's obviously a difficult task to do with the accomplishments that he's done. But in terms of Berlanga, Pacheco, and Munguia, 5 to 6 years from now, which one of those guys is, I guess, the moneymaker in 168?
Wow. That's an interesting question. Munguia probably has the biggest fan base. But, would he, does he beat Pacheco? Munguia, they're all pretty even, So, I would say at this point in time, if Munguia keeps winning, he's probably, has the biggest potential for box office and taking the Cinco de Mayo and Mexican Independence Day dates. It would make sense. But I don't know that he's, Canelo is the face of boxing because he's, been, lineal champion in 3 divisions. Munguia has not been lineal champion in any division, So, I don't know that any of these guys is ever going to be a face of boxing. Are they going to be the best at 68? Possibly. I don't know if Janibek comes up, does he beat these guys? I don't know. Does Beck the Bully beat any of these guys? To me, it could be one of those things where I don't think are any of them good enough to dominate the division? I don't know. We got to see him fight. I'd like to see him fight. It's a lot of interesting fights, but could be like junior middleweight was before Jermell Charlo kind of settled it. Where the titles just pass hands, constantly between, good but not great fighters. So we'll see.
Exactly. We will see. That's how usually fights develop as time goes forward. And then quickly also on the card, Eduardo Lunes gets his 27th win with the 7th round TKO over Miguel Mariaga. And then also Arturo Cardenas gets the split decision win over Jesus Archiga by scores of 96-94 for Archiga, 98-92, and 96-94 for Cardenas. So hard-fought split decision win there on that DAZN card for Matchroom Boxing. And then also this past September, Tuesday morning over here in the United States from Japan on ESPN here in the United States, and I believe Prime Video, Amazon's Prime Video in Japan, a top-ranked telecast in the United States for the Super Bantamweight undisputed titles. The monster Naoya Inoue remains undefeated at 28-0 with the 7th round TKO over TJ Doheny, who takes the 5th loss of his career. Doheny appeared to experience some type of injury. It looks like maybe a back injury of some type. Which caused him to take a knee and signal to the referee and, made Inoue stop punching. So with Inoue retaining his super bantamweight undisputed titles, Kurt, where does he go from here? He's eventually he's going to hit a weight class if he keeps going up, which the next one I believe is 126. Is that the weight class that's going to be the wall for him?
It's really hard to say. He's just a really solid fighter with tremendous power. Obviously the higher up in weight he goes, you wonder if he carries the power and just if he's just big enough physically to take what's coming back. And where he goes from here, I think the super fight for him is Junto Nakatani, who's at bantamweight right now. 2 undefeated. I think they're both 28-0. They're both champions in multiple divisions. Inoue has faced a lot better competition than Nakatani has, but Nakatani's tall, lefty with power. I think they're on a collision course. I would assume probably late next year they're looking to do it because I don't know if you saw Lance Pugmire's article. He interviewed Bob Arum after the fight, and basically I think he's probably going to face it sounds like Sam Goodman in his next fight in December. The Australian kid who's undefeated.
He's a mandatory, I believe, right?
He's a mandatory, yeah. He's a mandatory, so he'll cross that off the list. But and then they want to bring him to the States, which definitely means that the Nakatani fight is not happening in April. I think they're looking maybe late or maybe mid, or no. I think they were talking April for the States. So that would probably be like sometime in the fall then. They're looking at Nakatani. And I think Nakatani has a fight coming up, like his own mandatory in October. And then I guess maybe that, ideally, if they do this right, he would unify with Inoue's brother, who's a champion at bantamweight, because you get that whole revenge of the brother thing. We're going to bring back the old Klitschko brothers theme. If Nakatani beats Inoue's brother, then it really sweetens that fight for Japan. And a lot of people too are really hoping that somehow, some way, Bam Rodriguez gets in there and fights Nakatani, but I don't think that's going to happen before Nakatani meets Inoue. But I think he's got he's got a little bit more business at 122 in a super lucrative fight against Nakatani. And he said he wanted to stick around for another year or two at 22. So, and I think that's why, because he wants Nakatani. And he also makes the weight pretty easy at this point.
What about MJ Akhmadiliev?
Yeah, that's a good fight. That's a good fight. For some reason, Top Rank really doesn't seem to want it. Maybe they do that one in April. Because they didn't really mention any opponents for his fight in the U.S. So maybe it's Akhmadaliev. He's a good fighter, Olympian, former unified champ. That's a good fight. I'd like to see it. There's a lot of people like to see it, and that would I think that would take care of his mandatories, right? I think I think Goodman might be number 1 in 2 of the organizations. Let me take a real quick check. Yeah, good. He's not mandatory in the IBF, but he's number 1, and he's the mandatory in the BO, Goodman. So he is number 1 in 2 of the organizations. A Mexican fighter, Picasso, I think he's the kid who fought on the Mayweather pay-per-view.
Oh, the Gotti one recently?
Yeah. He's. I think he's number 1 in the BC, and he's the mandatory. So maybe that's the fight that they're going to do in April here in the States. So I don't know. I don't know if Akhmadaliev is going to get that shot at Inoue. We'll see. But
what
I
is your?
I don't know. Are we excited about anything other than Nakatani?
What's your take, Kurt? You've been involved, like as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, with Ring City, and then you've been involved in other things behind the scenes for fighters. You mentioned doing some work for Berlanga and his team on the legal side and all that. So, what's your take from the business perspective on the experience you have in boxing and all that from different formats? What's your take on, in a way, staying in Japan and just staying as a star over there and making his money, and people who criticize him, oh, well, he needs to come to the United States if he really wants to, be the guy. What's your take on the criticism like that?
It is a world sport. And Inoue is making so much, it dwarfs what he could make in the States. He's got, a big deal with Amazon over there. He fills up stadiums over there. And the Nakatani fight will be absolutely massive over there. So, on my own podcast, I had Cliff Rolled on, and he was just talking about, he's like, listen, people talk about, Inoue, he only fights in Japan. He's like, but the money he generates for 122 pounds right now dwarfs anything in the history of that division. And that division's had some great fighters, Barrera, Morales, it's got a great history. But, the fact that, you're talking Fulton made, multi-millions for that fight. And Inoue probably made twice what Fulton made. So, we're talking, maybe $10 million in that fight. That's unheard of for 122 pounds. And, certainly, that's Riyadh season type money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why in the world would he fight anywhere else? I mean, you're a prize fighter. You're fighting for money. So if he's making that much money and he's a cultural icon in Japan, I mean, good for him, man. That's awesome. Japanese boxing is on fire right now. They've got so many world champions, from junior featherweight on down, and they've got some great fighters. So, I'm cool with it. I mean, obviously it would be great if, he fought here in the States. It'd be a treat. I'd love to go see him. But in terms of making money and business, I mean, it just makes sense for him to stay there. He's an absolute superstar.
So one thing that Mike and I have talked about in the past in regards to Inoue, when we've been on this topic about, does it matter if he comes over here because he's making such boatloads of money over there and he's a superstar in Japan? Like, they have the economy to obviously support those millions of dollars for his fights at 122 pounds. Like you said, nobody's making that type of money in and around that weight class. Like, it's not even close. But one point I did bring up to Mike, and the multiple times we've talked about this topic in the past, is because of the LA market, obviously having a significant Japanese population out here, but also with the baseball team, the Los Angeles Dodgers, having arguably, one of the biggest athletes in the world on their team now, in Shohei Ohtani, who's from Japan. And they also picked up a pitcher this past offseason who came straight from Japan, named Yamamoto. I was telling Mike that, I've been to Dodger Stadium for games a couple of times this year. And every time I go, there's always new signs or new directions within the stadium and the parking lots that include Japanese writing. So they've obviously seen, an uptick in the population coming to these games, just being in the LA economy. And I think when there was the Boxing Writers Association dinner or something earlier this year in New York, I believe the Dodgers were playing at Yankee Stadium during that week or weekend. And there was a picture where Inoue and the pitcher from the Dodgers from Japan, Yamamoto, I believe, met, and they took a photo together. If you're going to talk business, if you can somehow maybe get Inoue to throw out the first pitch at Dodger Stadium, get those three to take a picture together, maybe even the biggest thing is maybe even get those two guys, if it's an off day, if they can plan it like that, to go to his fight in LA. I think in terms of business and box office, I don't know how much bigger you can get for him if you can kind of do that for the perfect storm. I mean, what do you think about that fantasy booking at this point?
I think in the near future, maybe that makes it. It would make sense if Rafael Espinoza at featherweight, who Top Rank has, turns into more of a star, which is a possibility. I mean, he's a tall kid who hits hard, throws a ton of punches, but he does get hit. He is vulnerable, and who's to say he wins his rematch with Rubisi Ramirez? But
tough fight.
I think that fight in Los Angeles or Vegas. I mean, Vegas isn't too far from Los Angeles.
No, it's not.
I could see it. I could see it being a really big cultural event. If Espinoza within the next year or two becomes a star or unifies titles, I could definitely see that fight. Being a massive fight and a desirable fight here in the U.S. That could merit bringing Inoue here for a big fight. Especially if he fights Nakatani, beats him, and Espinoza has success. If it's a fight that the fight fans like, it's a dream fight. If it turns into a dream fight in a year or two, then I could definitely, you could definitely justify either Los Angeles or Vegas for a big event with Inoue coming over here.
Earlier this year, Neary, he fought Louis Neary, and Inoue did go down, I believe, from like a sweeping left hook from Neary in that fight, and then Neary ended up being stopped later on in the rounds, obviously. Do you think that had any type of effect. I mean, obviously he won. He beat Doheny this week, caused some type of injury. But do you think that kind of made him a little gun shy because of Neri, taking that knockdown a couple months back? I believe, was it May? Or do you think Inoue is just kind of the guy like, oh, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. That knockdown was a fluke.
I think without question, he reacted to that in the fight. He's in there with another left-handed, big left-handed puncher in Doheny. Doheny's scored a couple of big knockouts in Japan with that big left hand, and is such an awkward fighter. Doheny, like he throws 1,000,001 feints, and I read in Pugmire's article, it was he came in rehydrated to over like 147 pounds, so he was massive in there. Next to Inoue. So, some people are criticizing Inoue's performance, across Twitter, but I'm like, you got knocked down your last fight. Doheny's a puncher, and he's a welterweight in there, and he's throwing 1,000,001 feints at you. And yes, you've been working on defense because you got clocked. I mean, the thing is, I saw in the Tapales fight that he was getting hit clean with shots by Tapales. And I was just like, man, if Neri touches him with something like that, it's going to be problems. And Neri did touch him and sent him down hard, So I think, Inoue being the pro that he is, he's just like, all right, I got to clean this up. Now, even so, Doheny had, I thought he won round 3, and he was definitely touching Inoue with some shots. But he was so much bigger than Inoue. It's just, physically, he was taller than him, and it's just so much heavier than him. He had to be a little cautious in there, but once he kind of got through all the awkwardness and all those feints by Doheny and got to the inside, he got him out. I mean, I didn't see anything like, oh, he's on the slide, or oh, he's gun shy now. But it's a natural reaction. I mean, Anthony Joshua, same thing. After Klitschko put him down hard, he became more cautious. It's like you don't want to get hit like that a lot. So yeah, I think he was more cautious and trying to be a little more defensive, even though he still got touched a little bit. But you're going to get hit. It's world-class boxing. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to worry that he's going to, become, Shakur Stevenson at this point in time. But yeah, I think that Neri knockdown definitely, was a red flag for him, that he's got to, definitely be a lot more cautious and not just throw caution to the wind.
Is he pound for pound? In a way, number 1.
It's geez Louise. I mean, you've got Usyk, who hasn't lost the fight and who's beaten everybody on the road, and just beat a guy who outweighed him by about 60, 70 pounds. He's got a great case. Crawford is so skilled. Didn't look great in his last fight. But that's his 4th weight division, and he's 37 years old. I mean, the one thing I'll say about it is, and then you got Canelo out there too, although he lost the B-ball, so he's doesn't seem as invincible as the undefeated guys. But Usyk is getting up there. Was he 38? Crawford's like 37. Canelo's in his mid-30s. I mean, Inoue's 31, so he's probably closer to his prime than any of those guys. Comparing resumes, I mean, it's pretty even between all those guys, no matter who you have number 1, it's someone's going to argue with you. But in terms of who's closer to their prime of all those guys, it's definitely Inoue. So I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. I mean, I don't really do a pound for pound. To me, Usyk, Crawford, Inoue, any one of them could be number 1 or number 3, depending on how you look at it. So, but he's
interchangeable.
Yeah. I would say of the 3, though, he's the most entertaining to watch because he's so explosive. So
yeah, absolutely. Moving on to fight previews this upcoming Friday, the September 6th, 2024, from Temecula, California, wine country in Southern California, on DAZN, a Marv Nation Promotions card, super lightweight. Jose Chon Zepeda, 37-5 with 28 KOs. It goes up against Ivan Redkach, 24-7-1, 19 KOs in a 10-rounder. Kurt, do you think this one by Zepeda and Redkach, do you think this is one of those crossroads type of fights?
I think it's beyond crossroads. I think this is a loser leaves town kind of fight. I think that the loser of this fight should really think seriously about retiring, because Zepeda's been in such great fights, and he's kind of, he's had a couple shots at the title, didn't quite get it done, and, got knocked out, like KO'd, count to 10 by a prospect who only had like 14 or 15 fights in his last fight. So a loss to Ivan Redkach, I think, it's over. And for Redkach, he's, hasn't really ever, gotten even to where Zepeda has. So if Zepeda coming off a loss to a prospect knocks him out, I think Redkach should probably think about. I haven't seen Redkach's last couple fights, but people are already saying that Redkach shouldn't even be in the ring, that he's already done. So, listen, people got to fight and veterans got to fight. And if you're going to, it's definitely one of those fights between two vets who have a name. So in that way, it's interesting. If you're a boxing fan, you should keep an eye on this fight, see who wins it. But I think at this point, both guys have seen better days, and I think the loser of this fight, not that I'm, obviously it's an individual decision for every person to make, but if you lose this fight, you're probably way out of contention, and you're just an opponent,
Yeah. Father Time is undefeated, right? So.
Absolutely.
News and notes section of this week's episode of the Last Round podcast. Teofimo Lopez. There's video and the pictures released. It seems like he's now training with Canelo's team. They were both in the ring. Canelo looked like he was teaching him some stuff. What was your reaction to that, Kurt? What do you think about that situation?
Listen, I think Eddie Reynoso is an excellent trainer, and obviously Canelo is a guy who's gotten better, with age. His defense improved, and, you can see how he's improved as a fighter. One of the big complaints with Teofimo was that he's been with his dad too long, and his dad really isn't adding anything to him, that he's a great, I think Cliff Roll said this to me, like he's, and someone had said it to Cliff, so I don't know who to attribute this to, but they said, Lopez is a superior athlete, but not a superior fighter. Like his IQ in the ring is a little questionable game plan wise. Like he seems to, especially against tall lefties, he just, doesn't really seem to be able to combat that style. It doesn't make adjustments. So, if anything, Eddie's a guy who's very good at game planning and that kind of thing. So I think it's a very positive thing, if it's something he's really going to commit to, I think I would treat it as positive for sure.
Do you think that Teofimo doing this, and like you said, he's been trained by his dad for so long, maybe this is a nice little way to kind of get some more advice and instruction from, arguably one of the best fighters of the last decade or so, and best trainers as well. But does that kind of possibly indicate that he's preparing for maybe a big fight, maybe against a Tank Davis or, somebody like that? So he's like, oh, well, I should go with Canelo. And since he's fought the best of the best and he's made the most money, if I'm going to start stepping up my game to fight these guys, why not get it from the best? What do you think?
It's possible. I know that he's talked about moving up to 47, and to touch upon, something else we might have talked about. There was certainly a lot of talk about him fighting Brian Norman, moving up to welterweight and fighting for the WBO title. So now that Boots Norman is probably not going to happen, that fight makes a lot of sense for both guys.
Yeah.
And really, it's weird because like 140 has so many good fighters, but like right now for Teofimo, as he's looking at the landscape, there's not really any huge fight that like Haney lost. That would have been a massive fight. I don't know if Haney's staying at 40, but it looks like, if he is, Eddie Hearn's trying to talk him into a Liam Paro fight. So maybe that's a reason for Lopez to stick around. But I mean, if that fight hasn't already gotten made, I don't know when it's going to get made, Lopez and Haney. So, but, does he really want to fight Alberto Puello? I doubt it. Jose Valenzuela seems like he's going to take on Tank. And, Tank Lopez obviously is a great fight, but I don't know. That's one that's been talked about for years and has gone absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
So he really wants to move up to 47. The Norman fight makes sense. They're both with Top Rank. Norman could use a big fight. But yeah, and Teofimo thought about fighting 3 times this year. They had a date for him in New York, then they canceled it. He said he wanted to fight in LA. Who knows what's going to go on with Teofimo? I don't know what the next move is. His mandatory is Arnold Barboza, but no one's talking about that fight getting made. So, if he's planning to move up in weight, obviously Canelo's a guy who's moved up quite a bit, and he's, Canelo started at welterweight or maybe even junior welterweight when he first started. He was really young. So he's moved up weight divisions quite a bit. So, I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it means he's preparing for a big fight, but who knows, man? Who knows?
Yeah, I think you're kind of right when you're saying that he might move up to 147. I mean, he's obviously growing a little older. His body's getting bigger, just like Haney and Ryan Garcia. I mean, those are other examples who with that same generation of fighters in 135, 140. They're both moving up. They both put on a lot of weight in between their fights, so that kind of indicates like, oh yeah, that's not their natural weight where they like to be at. So. Is there anybody my guess is that Teofimo does move up to 147. Maybe the next fight is a catch weight just to kind of get in the middle right there for right now. But is there anybody at 140 or even a catch weight at 142 that he would stay at 144?
You mean
assuming he wants to move to 147?
Like a good catch weight fight for him?
Yeah, like if it like the lower
test the waters.
Yeah, we could say that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Like, I think Top Rank would be really smart not to put him in with a lefty. Right. They have Santillon, who is a lefty, but who stands right in front of you. I just said not to put him in with a lefty, but that fight would make a lot of sense because, Santillon just, took a pretty bad beating from Brian Norman.
Right.
He's not, I wouldn't call him an elite fighter at all. He's a very good workman-like fighter, fringe top 10 guy. He'd be a perfect guy for Lopez to test the waters with at welterweight. I mean, just thinking about fights that actually could get made.
Right.
That's a Top Rank guy. Listen, man, welterweight is just barren right now,
Right.
A guy realistically, and I don't think he's with a major promoter, so he would be perfect. A guy like Nicholas Flaws, it's certainly not a big, but you're just talking about test the waters fight. Flaws is rated in a couple of organizations. He's a guy who just moved up from 140. It's very possible he could make a 44 or something. Had a couple decent wins, but he's definitely not fought anyone on the level of Teofimo. No one at all would get excited about that fight, but if Teofimo literally was just like, fine, I just want to test the waters, and, that's a fight that certainly you could put on ESPN. They could afford it. That's definitely not a pay-per-view fight.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. So, and he's not a lefty. and he comes right at you. He's not you're not gonna have to look for him. That's a good fight. I mean, literally, if you again, it's not a fight anyone would be excited about, but it's one where you don't have one of the siloed promoters who has the fighter, not a PBC, not a Matchroom, not a Golden Boy fighter. I think he's probably connected with Pro Box at this point in time, and they seem to be willing to put their guys on the major networks and big fights. So that would be a guy I would suggest.
Yeah. No, I could see that. And also the first non-pay-per-view event for PBC's partnership with Amazon Prime Video has been announced for October 19th of this year. An IBF world title fight at 154 pounds. Bakram Murtazayev. I know I said that wrong.
I pronounce it Murtazayev or
Murtazayev. Is that how you say it? Murtazayev?
That's my best guess.
It sounds. I think you beat me. It sounds better than mine. So, goes up against Tim Zhu from Orlando, Florida. So this is a fight happening in the Orlando, Florida area. As I mentioned, 154 IBF World Title fight. What's your take on this fight?
I mean, it's an interesting fight because Murtazayev was one of these guys who. Main events brought over when they were still doing shows on HBO with Kovalev and all that. I remember seeing him at the Garden on an undercard. He probably holds the record for most fights taking step-aside money. I think he had about 3 or 4 of those fights where he allowed Charlo to defend the title and not have to fight him, which always amazed me because the IBF was one of those organizations that didn't allow step-asides or step-aside money. Somehow, in this case, they did. I don't know. I guess Al and Kathy Dewey worked their magic, but he was patient and waited for it to clear out, and he got a good matchup with Jack Culkay and cashed in. And Culkay's a decent fighter, so I don't think this is a gimme for Tim Zhu. I think Murtazayev, is a guy who had a really solid amateur background, has kind of stayed in the picture, and beat Culkay, who's a solid fighter. I mean, I would certainly make Tim Zhu a favorite. Excuse me. But it's an interesting fight. I think it'll be a good fight.
And then, as I mentioned, this is the first non-pay-per-view event between PBC and Prime Video here. As boxing fans know, Tim Zhu has got a very big profile in Australia. I believe, what is it called? No Limit Boxing down there.
Yep.
So, they're obviously able to come in on the financial side and help out as well. Do you think, how significant would you say that their part is in this fight being a non-pay-per-view event for PBC on Prime?
I think it was always in the plan for PBC to do these non-pay-per-view fights. It's been, a very slow rollout of these fights. I know that there were, just problems with, Amazon getting up to speed on the pay-per-view stuff. And, Al may have had some health problems or what have you. And, but it seems like everything is now in order. So, they're ready to go full speed. I don't know that it's significant per se that this is that this particular matchup is on there, but hopefully it's a sign of things to come. I mean, when I spoke to Tim Smith a couple weeks ago, he was saying that, he's really looking forward to 2025, and you'll see a lot more of these type fights on Amazon that are non-pay-per-view. And in fact, there might be 3 or 4 more as the year goes on, or actually that's October. So maybe there's a couple more that they plan to roll out. But this is a solid one. If this was a main event on Showtime, I don't think anyone would be complaining. It's a solid matchup.
And then one thing that I wanted to end on, since we kind of touched on a lot of things on this episode, obviously. We always appreciate your time, and then you saving my butt and subbing in for Mike this week. So I definitely appreciate that, Kurt. Joe Tessitore just recently had a debut with the WWE, who's obviously now owned by the newly formed TKO, who is also under the umbrella, or UFC is also under their umbrella. I believe also the Endeavor Holdings and all that. There's a couple different companies. They're all under the same thing there. Joe Tessitore, now with the WWE, he was obviously a lot of boxing fans know him from ESPN Boxing, most recently Top Rank Boxing, the last couple years or so. What do you think about somebody like that, Joe Tessitore, being so associated with boxing, especially for boxing fans, kind of making the jump to somewhere like professional wrestling?
Listen, Joe is a guy who works very, very hard. I know that about him. I happened to be on a plane with him at one point in time for years ago when he was doing blow by blow on the ESPN Friday Night Fights alongside Teddy Atlas. So I know he's a guy who works very hard, does his research. It's interesting because, this is I'm not a big wrestling fan, I gotta say.
Right. It's becoming very big though ever since TKO came in.
Yeah, it's fake. I've always just thought of it as large men in tights rolling around. I know they're athletes, they're big guys, and if any of them heard me saying this, they'd pound my head, and I don't have any question about that. But I don't know. I've never been a big wrestling fan. To me, it's a huge step down, but I'm sure that he's being compensated very well for it. And to be honest, wrestling kills boxing in ratings. And they get a lot more money from the networks because, a lot more people watch on a consistent basis. I mean, millions of people watch every week, but you can't say that about boxing. So I guess for Joe, maybe it's a step up. I'm sure it's probably a pay raise. So I don't blame him. And a lot of people are not enamored with Joe Tessitore's style. They think he's a shill at this point and gets a little too excited about knockouts and stuff. So he should fit right in, right? With the hyperbole of wrestling commentary, but. I don't know. He's always the guy who seemed like fairly serious about his job. So it's a surprising choice for me for someone to do wrestling. I would think they'd want someone with a little more sense of humor and a little, someone who's, lightens up a little more than Joe. But hey, listen, good for him. I mean, if he's getting a huge pay raise, and I mean, he's a very hardworking guy. I have a ton of respect for him. If he just wants to give this a shot, if he loves wrestling, then hey, I'm happy for him.
Does TKO, which is the parent company of the WWE and UFC, do you think in 5 years' time, from now until 5 years now, do you think they get into the boxing game?
I think boxing would have to be a lot more streamlined for them to get in, which it may become with, the Saudis certainly have the idea they want, Turkey Al-Sheikh just reiterated in an interview with Talk Sport in Britain that he definitely wants to do this boxing league, right? And you can see how it's taking shape, right? Like they're making moves. They're put together. I guess they don't like BoxRec, or they couldn't buy BoxRec, so they've got this Fight Facts thing going. So they've got their own record keeper. They've got Fight.net with Rick Reno all ready to go for their own website. I've heard they're about to buy The Ring, or they're trying to buy The Ring. So maybe that's the title, the lineal title that they want, and maybe the ratings that they're going to use, and maybe they're going to push the sanctioning bodies out with that. So, if the Saudis can, get their arms around the sport and actually form some type of league, maybe then TKO gets interested. But like, there's been, like the whole Zuffa boxing thing, and Dana's been teasing that he's going to straighten out boxing. Boxing's broken. Boxing's garbage. All the promoters do is argue. But you know what? I mean, if they jumped in at this point, they'd just be another promoter, And certainly the business model in boxing is different than MMA, right? I mean, the fighter pay is almost like reversed. I think fighter pay in the UFC, their wage share is like 18% of what's coming in, whereas boxing, I think the fighters make like 60 to 70% with most promoters, so it's literally almost flipped. So the UFC coming in and trying to pay less, good luck with that. But if someone else came in and did their dirty work and kind of consolidated boxing and got everyone all signed up to a league and overpaid them, this was John. I don't know if you know John Nash, but I had John Nash, who's an MMA writer.
He's been on the show before.
He was at Bloody Hell. I love John Nash, but John was on my podcast, and we were talking about it. And what he was thinking was if the Saudis pulled this off, like the first generation of fighters is going to get overpaid, the next generation of fighters is going to get paid well, but eventually, with a monopoly, he could see it, them squeezing the fighters like they do in the UFC. Mm-hmm. So if it got to that point, I'm sure TKO would be like, all right, now you're talking, we can make some money off of this. So I don't think, because of the margins, TKO is particularly interested in dipping their toe into boxing at this point. I mean, most people think the play that outside investors, when they look at boxing from the outside right now, everyone talks, the first thing would be to buy Top Rank, right? Because it's an American promoter. They've been around forever. They're very professional. They seem to have a handle on how to pay fighters reasonably. They have a TV deal. And obviously there's been rumors that, just last year they were talking about how, Endeavor or TKO was kicking the tires very seriously on Top Rank. But all that got quashed. And, I don't know that's going to happen anytime soon, especially if if you've got the Saudis already sponsoring Top Rank and putting money into these promoters and knowing how much money they have, they could probably outbid anybody, including TKO. So I'd be very surprised if TKO got in. Could I see a scenario where Top Rank is just like really turned off by the Saudis and Bob finally at 90 something wants to cash out? And Todd DeBuff is huge friends with Lawrence Epstein, who's the big wig, one of the big wigs, used to be, I think he's even, I don't know if he's CEO, COO over at UFC, but they're tight. I think, they're in each other's weddings. So, I mean, there's obviously good relations between the two. So, it's not something that would absolutely shock me. But right now, I don't see them making a move in the near term in boxing.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think it's going to take a little bit for the generation of fighters to really settle in, especially in terms of pay. So I can definitely see your point there. Kurt, obviously, I appreciate your time. I know you're on the East Coast. And I'm over here on the West Coast, so it's a little later for you over there. So I definitely appreciate your time, and Mike appreciates, even though he's not here to say thank you. I'm going to say thank you on behalf of Mike for you subbing in here. You mentioned your I think the last time you were here, you said you were thinking about bringing back your podcast, but now that you've returned, I think you brought it back. Can you tell us a little bit? Anything you got upcoming, anything you're trying to get in terms of guests or anything in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the Boxing Esquire podcast, that's Boxing ESQ podcast, with Kurt Emhoff is back. Done a number of episodes. I was planning to have a guest on, but he kind of had an unexpected trip, so I've been told. So that's not going to happen. So we'll see. In the next few weeks, I'll definitely crank another one out. But yeah, I try to bring on people in the business or top writers in the business to talk about the business of boxing. So that's kind of what the Boxing Esquire podcast is all about. Yeah, man, it's on Spotify and Apple and SoundCloud and a couple of other Podbean if you've got that.
Yeah. All the little random ones. Yeah.
Yeah, all those little random ones that somehow stole the feed. I didn't sign up with these places, but they've got the podcast. So if you get your podcast there, just Google it. You'll find a number of places to listen to it.
And you can follow Kurt on Twitter /X at boxing _Esquire or ESQ.
Yeah, _ESQ, boxing _ESQ. That's me.
ESQ. So. As I mentioned, Kurt, we always appreciate you jumping on here on the Last Round Boxing podcast. If you ever need any guests, I'm sure Mike would love to jump on now that he owes you since you subbed in for him. So,
definitely got to return the favor, have you guys on. So,
just let us know, man. You've done us the favor a couple times now. So, if you ever need any boxing guys, in a pinch or something, just reach out to us. You know where to find us. But once again, Kurt, we appreciate it. And then for my co-host, Michael Shepard, obviously we'll be back next week. I'm hoping Mike comes back next week. He should be back with me. So we'll see from there. Hopefully we get some more guests for your daily and weekly listening here on the Last Round. So for my co-host, Michael Shepard, who should be back next week, for our guest of the week and sports and entertainment attorney, Kurt Emhoff, I'm Danny Z. This is the Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is the Last Round